So what I'm presenting today is the work that we did together with CoreMedia earlier this year to integrate Hybris and the CoreMedia platform. Most of what I'm going to present is actually going to be live demo from the POC that we developed, and then we have a few slides around it just to talk about kind of the use cases that we developed, as well as some next steps. I have a diagram to kind of give a high-level overview of how the integration works. But most of this is going to be kind of centered around the demo, and we can talk about some of the use cases and some of the kind of the business benefits of having an integration like this. So maybe a first, kind of as an introduction, because I know that we do have some people that maybe aren't familiar with Hybris and/or CoreMedia, is just to talk quickly about, what is Hybris, what is CoreMedia, and why are we interested in integrating the two of them, right? So the first one, Hybris, as most people or many people probably know, is one of the big three e-commerce platforms out there. It kind of really got pushed into the limelight when they were acquired by SAP sometime last year. Most of the recent reports say that they're probably about they're at least in the top three now in terms of big e-commerce platforms. E-commerce is their primary focus, but it's not really the only thing they do. They also do a lot of product content management or product information management, and it's a pretty extensive platform. It comes with its own CMS, which we'll actually see in the demo. Comes with a product cockpit, which is where you have the PCM functionality. It also comes with an accelerator. So this is kind of like an out-of-the-box store template that you can use to kind of get up and running quickly. Provides a basic MVC front end with templates that you can customize based on your brand and your logo and things like that. And we'll see that in the demo as well. What is CoreMedia? So CoreMedia is one of the big CMS platforms that are out there, content management systems or web content management. We'll actually see that in the demo as well. For those that aren't familiar, content management really centers around, exactly as the name implies, managing your content, as well as the information that goes around the content, right? So for instance, the functionality that you see in a CMS is like, different size of assets, views for different locations or, implementations. I think probably most people are familiar with CMS in general, and CoreMedia is definitely one of the big players in the space. So then why Hybris plus CoreMedia? So as we'll see in the demo, one of the things that Hybris does really well is basically your e-commerce platform, right? Your back end. So things like managing products, inventory, managing pricing, managing orders, things like that. One of the things that I would say it doesn't maybe do quite as well is content management. So that's where CoreMedia really steps in and why it makes sense to have an integration like this. The studio tools that CoreMedia provides and the functionality is a lot, one of the things I would say it's more business user friendly. It provides some features and some functionality that the Hybris CMS just doesn't quite have. So that's really kind of the history of where we're coming from for this integration. And how this came about is our friends at CoreMedia approached us. They knew that we were involved in Hybris development. We've also done a lot of CoreMedia projects at Boyle. So they approached us and said, okay, let's talk about doing an integration. And so that's kind of how it all got started. So without further ado, let's take a look at the demo. So maybe the first thing here to look at is the Hybris Accelerator storefront, which is what you see in front of you. Like I mentioned, the Accelerator is an out-of-the-box storefront, provides you some templates, provides you with a basic setup in terms of pricing, promotions, so on and so forth. The whole goal with the Accelerator is kind of to provide you a springboard for launching your own store. And of course, you can go in and customize anything that you see here in terms of the logo, the banners, so on and so forth, populate your products within it. It's a pretty basic storefront. I mean, this is all kind of basic e-commerce functionality in terms of navigation by categories, collections, however you want to kind of manage your product hierarchy, of course, pricing. Yeah, promotions, yeah, I won't spend too much time. It's pretty straightforward in terms of the e-commerce functionality that it provides. So maybe the next thing that we want to take a look at is the Hybris CMS cockpit. So this is Hybris's out-of-the-box CMS tool. And the reason that we're going to go in here and take a look is so that we can kind of start understanding how these pages are put together, at least from a Hybris standpoint. So the first one I'm going to take a look at is the home page, which is what we just saw. Now, right off the bat, you'll notice that the view that you're presented here is it's kind of a logical view of the home page that we just saw. Here in the middle, we have our Summer Classics banner, which is this big yellow banner that we see in the middle. You have this is a pretty standard layout. You have a header, navigation, this banner, some information at the bottom. Same thing within the CMS cockpit, right? These boxes kind of represent all those elements. So your header, your search box, mini cart in the top right, then your navigation, the banners, so on and so forth. The next thing I want to take a look at is this CoreMedia banner component. So I'm going to edit this. So as of right now, this is how we control and populate content that's coming from CoreMedia and make it appear basically in our accelerator. So this is one of the things that we developed as part of the POC, is this new CMS component type, and it's a CoreMedia component. So basically, the way that this works, and this is pretty standard for all CMSs, templates within Hybris, you define certain content areas or content slots. So you see this big slot at the top. The navigation bar is another slot. Here's section 1 slot. This is where you're going to put in banners or any other kind of promotional thing. These slots aren't actually being used, but you could, have a 3-column layout here for the slots beneath. There's no content there, but then within each content slot, you can define any number of banners, components, which is what we have here for this first slot. Summer Classics is what we're already showing. The CoreMedia component is the one that we've added. So over here on the right, you can see I've actually got it disabled, so we don't see anything yet on the home page. I'll go ahead and enable that. And what we're working into, just kind of as a note, is the online catalog here for the view that we're seeing. So any of the changes that I'm making here are going to be reflected right away on the front end, just for demo purposes. But there is kind of this staging online concept in Hybris as well. Yeah, so these parameters, I'm not actually going to spend too much time on them because, yeah, it's kind of the technical guts of how this integration works. Maybe I'll come back to that later whenever we talk about the overview of how all this kind of wires together. But some of these parameters basically these parameters are telling us what is the content that we want to pull out of CoreMedia and display for this particular component. So things like the site, the view. Here we have the view as placement. The other option would be as head. So we actually have components where we can pull in not only the content that appears like in the body of the page, but we can also specify the view to be as head, meaning we want to pull in CSS and JavaScript. If we actually edit this page, and maybe we can take a quick look at that now. So now we're looking at the page setup parameters here, and you'll notice that we have these same kind of parameters, right? Except for the view this time is the head. So this is what allows us to bring in content-specific CSS and JavaScript that ties together with our CoreMedia content that's going to be appearing on this page. So going back to our components. So the page type, default.home, this is actually telling us what component or what content to pull out of CoreMedia. The placement is kind of like the name of the item. Yeah, I won't spend too much more time on these parameters. So we've enabled it. So let's go take a look and see if this works. And ta-da, so we have now content that's being pulled in from CoreMedia system appearing here above our previous banner that we had. I'm going to actually open this in another tab so I can come back to it later. But let's take a quick look now into the CoreMedia Studio just to see yeah, how this content is set up over there. So we log in now to the CoreMedia Studio. So if we go to this homepage placements, this is the page within CoreMedia that corresponds to those parameters that I pointed out in the CMS cockpit. So basically, this is the content that we are wanting to pull in for this particular component, right? You'll see here, of course, we have the names that the same names that we saw there in those parameters as well. The winter banner is the particular one that we want to see. So like if we double click here, we can actually open up and see the actual content. So this is the banner that we were pulling in. So you can see the content is set up here. It can be managed within CoreMedia. And there's a lot of functionality here that I'm not actually going to dive into in terms of, the features and the abilities of CoreMedia. But this is, I think, probably one of the key kind of selling points of having this integration, right, is the abilities of the CoreMedia Studio to manage content in terms of, resizing images on the fly, setting up image maps here within the tool, being able to do a preview, which actually I'll talk about a little bit later. But the tools here, I think in the studio, as you can probably see, it's definitely a step up from the Hybris CMS cockpit in terms of the functionality that's available for managing content. So let's see, we have a couple of banners set up here on the page. So let's actually change this parameter and pull in a different banner, just to prove that this is actually live. So now we have the Aspen banner, so when we reload, we should see the Waikiki banner. And we do. So yeah, just kind of a demonstration that we are pulling this content live from the CoreMedia system. So the next thing maybe we can start talking about is what this banner actually links to. So as I mentioned before, I actually opened up the previous one. So this banner is set up to link to a microsite that we've set up within the system. Microsites are something that more and more e-commerce customers are asking for. They have a particular product that they want to highlight for a given month or something like that, and they want to build out a full-fledged microsite that they can either link to then on the e-commerce site itself, or that they can use in email blasts, that sort of thing. So this is something that definitely is, kind of a requested feature. From a functionality standpoint, one of the advantages here is from a rendering point of view, you'll notice that our URL still hasn't changed, okay? So if we go back to our Hybris storefront, you'll see we're actually at a apparel-UK local, this is my local system, blah, 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 right? So if we actually go to the microsite, again, this is still being rendered by the front end, the Hybris MVC front end, but the vast majority of this content is actually being served up and produced and managed within CoreMedia. So one of the big I think, benefits here, of course, is the SEO benefit, right? It allows you to manage all that content within CoreMedia, but your URL structure doesn't change, even so far as to say things like these parameters that Hybris builds into their URLs. So they have a nice feature where you can actually configure the SEO capabilities around the URL. So right now, for instance, we have the language appearing. It's possible to configure this and have, for instance, the currency appear in your URL. Other parameters, it's customizable. None of that, though, is required to be managed within CoreMedia. All of this URL generation still relies on the Hybris front end to manage that, and the content is rendered here. So next features, what are some of the other? Okay, so one key thing here. Actually, let's take a look at how this page is laid out in the Hybris CMS, just to kind of drive this point home. So we've set up a microsite page template. So this is the page template that's been used to render this particular page that we're seeing, right? So you'll see that we have kind of a minimal header at the top, and then we just have this one content slot with this one component that basically really turns over the whole rest of the page to CoreMedia. So when we go back to the page, basically everything below this header is being rendered by CoreMedia. Another thing to point out here that's kind of nice, kind of a limitation, I would say, I guess, of the current Hybris Accelerator is you'll notice this is the home page. You'll notice it's a fixed width layout. And as everyone knows, responsive is all the rage right now. So that's one of the things that I think Another kind of benefit that CoreMedia offers is, let's say it really works well with the adaptive or the responsive interfaces. So if we take a look at this, we resize this, you'll notice that it responds pretty well. This is a demo site that's set up by CoreMedia, but you can see like the font is resizing, the images, the layout. So, and this is something that you wouldn't have with the kind of out-of-the-box accelerator, let's say. So I would say this is kind of another selling point of having the integration, is this responsiveness. So sticking here with the microsites, a couple of other cool features that we have. So this is actually a real product that we have within our Hybris platform set up, these particular sunglasses. So we have the product price display, and this product price is actually coming from the Hybris platform. Even though all of this content that you see, including the Buy Now button, all of this content around it, is being served up by CoreMedia. So we substitute in the product pricing. It's coming live from the system. And as well, we also have the Buy Now button, which works as well, add to cart. So let me resize this and so that we can see. Let's see. So if we click Buy Now, we'll see the mini cart pop up, come up, and shows that we've added that to our cart. Let's add another one just so we can see it there again. So it's pretty cool because, again, all this content comes from CoreMedia, but we still have the basic functionality, or add to cart functionality, which is obviously very important for an e-commerce site, still working here within that content. Okay, let's take a look at the cart page from here. So just to highlight again, so the product pricing again, this is an actual product that we have set up in the Hybris system. You'll notice the product price was the same as we saw on the content. Yeah, we've got those two items in our cart. Yeah, pretty straightforward stuff here. The next thing that we want to highlight is this particular banner that we have set up. So this is an example of a product deep link functionality. So what this is it allows us to set up a content in CoreMedia as well as the particular product that this content should reference. So what that means is on the CoreMedia side, they can, let's have a generic cart banner, kind of like what we have here, but then they can control which product that actually links to. And I'll show you that here in just a minute in the studio. So for instance, right now, this banner, if we open this in a new tab, you'll see that it links to this particular product that was featured in that banner. On the CoreMedia side, actually, let's take a look at that now. I think that would be interesting. So this particular landing page is where this banner is set up, and this banner, and you'll see that it's referring to this default product that we have. So we double click in here. We've got some product name, product text. Currently, this content isn't being pulled into onto the Hybris side. So this is kind of a, let's say, a default product in the CoreMedia side, if you will. But if we look into our metadata, we have this SKU which references some product on the Hybris side. If we go back to our product, you'll notice it's the same SKU up here in the URL. And one thing that's interesting here is that the content that's being linked to from this banner, I don't know if you can see the URL in the bottom left corner, but it's actually an SEO-friendly URL, right? So it has, of course, all of our language, our currency, as well as the category that this particular product belongs into, and then finally the SKU. All of this logic, of course, is being handled on the Hybris side. The only thing that it knows is that we're rendering content for this particular SKU. Even though this content comes from CoreMedia, the actual hyperlink then is generated by Hybris and populated in. So kind of a nice tight integration to be able to, pull in your content, but still have the front-end store, Hybris in this case, be responsible for the URLs and the deep linking. Maybe I'll pause there for any questions before I move on.
So it's true to say, I believe, that the concept for your integration here is that Hybris is wrapping CoreMedia, right? Because all the URLs are being controlled by the container manager that Hybris is running, and the SEO and all of that. So you had to make a decision this way or that way to do it. And, can you talk about why was that I don't know, the natural way to go, or is it even possible to think about it the other way? Would CoreMedia wrap Hybris?
That's a good question. I mean, it is fair to say that, yeah, in the current setup, Hybris definitely kind of wraps all the content that's coming back from CoreMedia. Could it be the other way? I don't know. I think that, you know, like URL generation, that's pretty intimately tied to, for instance, your product hierarchy, how you have your products managed within Hybris, right? As well as things like this this language parameter, the currency parameter. So definitely from an SEO standpoint, I think that
a lot of
value in having Hybris still managing your storefront, right?
And I think probably the PCM, right, that relies on Hybris, where you have all the merchandising structure in there, right? Like what product belongs to what categories. So it makes sense to have also the URL structure on that side, because that's where you do the merchandising. Yeah.
Sorry, just a generic high-level question from Peanut Gallery.
Yeah, very good. Okay, cool. So I'll move on. Then we have, so the other thing that we want to show is a couple of context-sensitive content. So what I mean is content that is aware of where it's being displayed within the Hybris storefront. So the first kind of demo to that is here on the product detail page. We want to set up a banner that is aware of which particular product is being displayed or being requested at that given time. So let's take a look at the CMS cockpit. And let's pull up our product detail page. So again, we have a CoreMedia dynamic product detail component. It's currently disabled. And actually before let's go ahead and enable it. And then when we go back to this particular product detail page and reload, we should see some banner here that appears that is aware of what product is actually being displayed. So in this case, we're displaying a DC banner. Now if we go find another product, which we'll do now. So for instance, these Anon Sport video shades, these are actually the same product that we have our microsite set up for. I also have a banner set up for this particular product, so that's why I'm choosing the specific one. So this lightweight and always with you, take pictures and video, wherever you go, banner that you see at the top, this is coming from CoreMedia. So the banner, the content that's displayed here is depending on what particular product we're displaying on this page. And again, the same mechanism works here. The way it knows is this particular SKU is what's being sent across the wire, so that on the CoreMedia side, you know which particular product is being requested. The next kind of context-sensitive piece that we have are for category pages. So let's take a look at a couple of brand pages. I'm going to pull up the Anon brand page and the Vans brand page. So here's our Anon page. This is a kind of a product grid. It's basically the category page for this particular brand. And here is our Vans page. You'll see that there is already kind of an out-of-the-box component that provides some kind of dynamic functionality in terms of a name that's displayed in the top left and this logo in the bottom right. But we can kind of improve that, I think, with the CoreMedia integration. So let's go back to our product grid page or our category page. This is the particular template that we're looking at right now. And let's disable this dynamic existing component and enable our CoreMedia components. And you can go back and reload this page to see. So now you see we have an Anon banner that appears at the top here. And if we go to the Vans page, we should see a Vans banner that appears. So this allows you to set up the content based on the context, basically, of what page you're viewing within the system. Finally, for context sensitivity, we want to show an instance of personalization. In this particular case, we've just set up a basic personalization, which only looks to see if you're a registered user or not. So right now I'm an anonymous customer. I haven't logged into my account. But if I log into an account, then we should see a different banner that was displaying than what was displaying there. And we get a banner that's targeting me because I love winter apparel, so I get 10% off. Yeah, like I said, this is set up in the demo just to indicate whether or not you're logged in, but the actual information that's being sent to CoreMedia can include anything that's in the user profile. So if you have segmentation rules already set up in Hybris, it could send that information. Any other kind of user profile information could be sent along, and then personalization rules set up on the CoreMedia side. So that's pretty much it for the demo. Maybe I'll go back to the slide and just pull up this, to the presentation and pull up this next slide. Yeah, so these are basically the POC use cases that we developed, right? So we first saw content actually being pulled into the accelerator, a detail page for the CoreMedia content. This was our microsite. Product pricing being pulled from Hybris into CoreMedia content, seeing add to cart functionality work in the CoreMedia content, product URL deep link, and then the context-specific content. Yeah, before I move on, does anyone have questions here? Okay. So the next thing I wanted to give just kind of a high-level overview, since this is a tech talk, kind of how this integration works from a technical perspective. So I've drawn up kind of a simple diagram, but we'll talk through it just to kind of give you an idea of how this is functioning. So again, we have our users, our clients, web browsers, however you want to phrase it, making requests to the Hybris accelerator. So as we mentioned before, Hybris really still is your storefront. It still accepts all incoming requests. It's still responsible for rendering the content, right? So internally, once it's going to render that content, let's say that there's a particular component on the page that's defined to come from CoreMedia. That's where this CoreMedia Live Context library comes into play. So at that point, a content request and the parameters are sent to CoreMedia asking for that particular piece of content. Now, the parameters that are sent along can be, it kind of depends on the use case, right? It can be either the product SKU, it could be the catalog hierarchy for where that product's appearing, it could be personalization information. There's a lot of parameters that have already been developed and supported in this library. And then those can be used, of course, within CoreMedia to determine which content is returned and displayed. So in the content that comes back from CoreMedia, though, one of the kind of key pieces here is there are going to be certain places within that content where Hybris still needs to populate information. So things like the product price or things like the product detail page URL. That content's all coming back from CoreMedia, but you still need to be able to, let's say, insert that particular information. So the content fragment that comes back from CoreMedia has these certain placeholders, right? And then the CoreMedia Live Context library knows how to populate that content. So if it's a placeholder, say, for product price, it knows how to, to look up that price within Hybris and populate that in. That's probably actually one of the most, or where I would say most of the effort comes in terms of doing this integration, is setting up this logic in the CoreMedia Live Context library to kind of integrate so that it knows, okay, how do I look up a product price in Hybris? How do I get a product URL from Hybris? Once you kind of develop that logic and plug it into the Live Context library, that's really, I would say, the meat of the integration for any given setup or accelerator setup. And then finally, of course, once all of this is stitched back together, the accelerator returns the page back to the user. Maybe one additional comment here. So one of the, I would say, kind of strengths architecturally speaking of CoreMedia is it's designed with, I would say, web services and especially RESTful web services in mind, right? So all this content requests and parameters that are going over the wire here, I think there's a really good opportunity to kind of place some caching at this level, because I think one of the questions anytime that you have an integration like this is the performance, right? because obviously you're going to be making, if you make a lot of use of CoreMedia, you can imagine there's going to be a lot of these requests going back and forth, right? So you would want some kind of caching layer, I think, in between Hybris and CoreMedia to really help the performance there. And I think that the way that it's architected in terms of the web service requests and parameters really extends itself to being cacheable.
So the logic that selects the media on the CoreMedia side, that also needs to be implemented on the CoreMedia side, right? Because you only send parameters.
Yeah, that's true. There's I would say there's probably 7 or 8. I don't know. There's some predefined number of like use cases, right? So we saw like being able to differentiate content based on product SKU, based on product hierarchy, where it lives in the hierarchy, personalization rules. But yeah, there is some setup definitely required on the CoreMedia side.
So does that mean that you have to repeat let's say you do it by category and you have a category on the Hybris side, you have to repeat that category on the CoreMedia side?
So for right now, for the POC, yes, it's pretty manual. But actually, so the Live Context Library has actually been integrated with IBM WebSphere. That's kind of where it was born out of, right? And I think they already have the ability to, from within CoreMedia, browse into the IBM product catalog, see SKUs, see categorization, see the hierarchy. So it kind of bridges that gap, right? You can select, the category, the product, so on and so forth, from actually out of IBM within the Studio tool. So that's something that we could do here, and that's kind of like one of the next steps if we kept going with this integration, I think.
Say, Lane, I have a question.
Sure.
It's Casey. I was wondering, with your work, did you have to do most of the work on the Hybris side, or did you have to do anything custom on the CoreMedia side as well? Yeah,
so we had support from CoreMedia on their side to help with any changes that needed to be made. Like I said, the library, I think, was first developed really for IBM WebSphere. So I would say the bulk of the development was already there. We had to do, I think they had to do some small tweaks here and there based on some things that we found. But yeah, the bulk of the work on my side was all in Hybris, and it was all in the accelerator front-end extension. And I think that this is another thing that probably could be improved. So I did all the work in the front-end extension. It's a pretty small, I would say, integration, really. I mean, we're talking, a dozen classes here and some JSPs and things like that to kind of set up this logic of how to render certain pieces of content. So I think it would be pretty easy to integrate into an existing accelerator storefront. With that said, I think that, the Hybris add-on extension, this ability to kind of package up these front-end extensions would be a great fit for something like this.
Exactly. I was just about to mention.
Yeah, I actually looked into that a little bit when I first got started, and I found a few things that just weren't quite there that I needed, particularly around WebXML setup and let's say how Spring-friendly the CoreMedia library is. And that's not a ding against the library. It's more, I don't think that they had to deal with Spring. So I think there's some small improvements that probably could be made that would make it pretty easy to adapt this into an add-on extension, which is cool from a business standpoint too, right? Because then it could be sold in the Hybris Extend marketplace.
Right, and the extension, as the extension evolves, you can have that add-on separate,
Yep, definitely.
Cool.
Yeah, so I already mentioned a few of these improvements and next steps. So one thing, of course, is the responsiveness of the Hybris accelerator. Now we know that Hybris is working on a responsive accelerator. I don't know if they've announced a launch date for that, but it is definitely in their pipeline. That is one, I would say, kind of stumbling block that I had with the integration is CoreMedia kind of by default, well, actually out of the box, at least, it uses Blueprint. It really lends itself to responsive layout in terms of the JavaScript, the CSS that's designed. But the Hybris storefront or accelerator, at least the version I was using, is not responsive, and it was not using, it was a little difficult, I would say, at times to kind of plug in that responsive content into the static layout of the accelerator. In fact, you know, I had to kind of turn off some of the responsive features coming out of CoreMedia just to get it to kind of look okay for a demo. So I think that, yeah, once there is a responsive accelerator from Hybris, I think that, again, this would see a lot more kind of benefit, this integration, because, yeah, I think CoreMedia would serve up responsive content that would plug right in.
Lane, I'm actually working on that.
Oh, very good. Okay, the add-on extension I mentioned already. I think that would be a very nice thing to have if this was packaged up in an add-on to be sold. The CoreMedia preview and the catalog product lookup integration. So I mentioned this already briefly. Yeah, so this exists in the IBM WebSphere integration, the ability to kind of see and view the product catalog from within Studio, as well as this preview capability. So basically having the ability to preview the site from within CoreMedia Studio. That's something that we don't have in this POC, and I think would be a very nice thing to have. Probably then last but most important, though, is customer validation, right, around this whole proof of concept. I think that, yeah, it definitely, there are lots of business cases that can be made, but, you know, the trick is finding that first customer that has this scenario where they want to either use CoreMedia new, or they already have CoreMedia and they want to stick with that, and they want to platform on Hybris. So I think this is kind of an all-important step to moving this forward. Yeah, that's pretty much it for me. I'll take any other questions folks have. I just did also want to say special thanks to Janelle, Karsten, and Patrick at CoreMedia, who helped out a great deal for developing this POC. In fact, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have this. So, yeah, thank you to them. And, yeah, any questions?
Wow, that's surprising. Okay. I'm sure there's others who send them in later or email us. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's a very, very good overview.
I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
I have one question. Just I was wondering if there's any complications that come from the component, including, you know, everything, the CSS and the JavaScript and all that. Is that something that, I don't know, is that pretty manageable, or is there something you have to kind of be aware of as you work with these components that might have various pieces where there might be like namespace conflicts or something like that? I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, you know, in general, yes, you still have to kind of be aware of, you know, what JavaScript frameworks are you throwing onto the page, right? Like I mentioned, the accelerator out of the box, I get them back confused, but it uses one of the CSS layout frameworks, and CoreMedia uses one of the others. So you still have to be aware of that. I did have to make some tweaks in terms of where, as well, this JavaScript and CSS is loaded on the page. For instance, I think CoreMedia was expecting the JavaScript and CSS to be loaded, or at least the JavaScript to be loaded at the end of the page, whereas Hybris out of the box accelerator loads all of that in the head section of the page. So little things like this, but I wouldn't call them big issues. And I would expect that it will get much easier once we have a responsive accelerator. And they're using a similar responsive CSS and JavaScript framework.
So, Casey, this is Dan. I didn't realize you were working on that project.
Yes.
The responsive Hybris accelerator.
Yes.
Do you have a timeline on that?
Well, I don't know if I can mention that. I'm not sure.
All right. Okay.
Okay.
We'll talk offline. Good one. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching. It is very good, Lane. Yeah. Another excellent job.